What's up, everybody? Salama from Made Gains, and I'm happy to have Nick McMillen, who has a master's degree in sports psychology and is currently the coach at Cooper's Sport Performance and Rehab in Tampa, Florida. So, Nick, thanks for being on.
Yeah, man, thanks so much for having me.
So we have a list of questions that we got from my Instagram and a few other spots where we're going to be covering what mental toughness is and ways to improve it. So the first question is, what is mental toughness and how is it defined in exercise and sports psychology?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So there are a lot of different definitions for mental toughness. I think one that I like is by Gucciardi in 2017, and they define it as a purposeful, flexible, and efficient state-like psychological resource for enacting and maintaining goal-directed pursuits. So that's a lot, right? So basically, what they kind of say is that it's state-like so that you can learn it. It's not just like a trait where you're born with it or not born with it. And it's for maintaining those goals that you have, especially during like adversity and stuff like that.
So it's being able to stick with a goal even when things get rough, right? It's kind of staying the course and trying to achieve the goal when you're dealing with conflicts and things that are popping up.
Yeah, and the path is never linear. There's always things that happen. There's always ups and downs. So it's really important to have that mental toughness aspect during sport because we all lead stressful lives. So having that toughness and that resiliency and that confidence and all of that, those psychological constructs is really important.
Okay, great. So question number two was, what are the main aspects of mental toughness?
All right, good question. So there are a lot of aspects of mental toughness, which is why a lot of the times it's hard to, talk with coaches or athletes about it because they just think that mental toughness is this one thing that they need to improve on. But actually, there's a ton of stuff. So first, it's maintaining performance levels through adversity, and then perceiving pressure as a challenge and not a threat, and then maintaining emotional, cognitive, and behavioral control despite stressful situations. So trying to really control those emotions during the game or something like that. You see soccer players get upset, and then you see that they're really angry and they go get a red card or something like that. And you see this throughout all sports. Baseball players break their bats, tennis players throw their rackets, golf, all this. So there's a ton of different aspects of mental toughness. And then also going into that, there's a lot of different things that relate to mental toughness. So, confidence or your self-belief. Like I said earlier, emotional and cognitive control, and then accepting, persevering, and thriving through challenges, and then commitment and determination. So that kind of goes with the goal aspect. You're determined to achieve that goal that you have. So kind of what I talk about when they're talking about mental toughness, basically if you're saying my athlete needs to be mentally tougher, you're basically saying they need to have adversity, they need to perceive pressure as challenge, they need to maintain their emotional, cognitive, behavioral control, they need to be confident, they need to accept, persevere, and thrive through challenges. They need to be committed and determined. They need to have coping, self-talk. You get where I'm going with this. There's so much. Like you can't just say, I want to be mentally tougher. There's a lot that goes into it.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. So if you do have an athlete that comes to you or a coach that says, I want my athlete to be more mentally tougher, which one of those things do you try to tackle first, or how do you sort of prioritize those different aspects?
Yeah, good question. So it kind of goes with what the athlete's problems or issues are. Maybe they're not as confident as they want to be. So that's something I would tackle if that was one of their problems. It's never cookie cutter. It's always individualized. So if an athlete comes up or if a coach comes up and talks about an athlete saying that they need to be mentally tougher, I'm going to ask questions. I'm going to say, okay, what aspect of mental toughness do they need to improve on? or do they want to improve on? Um, there's a lot of different relations and a lot of different psychological constructs that are correlated with mental toughness. So kind of like I was talking about, effective coping. Maybe they're not very good at coping with stressors. So out on the field and they get angry, they might work with some like anger management or emotion regulation. Self-talk, maybe their self-talk is predominantly negative. And then relaxation strategies, maybe it's difficult for them to relax. Maybe the night before, maybe they can't get sleep. Or during the game, they can't really relax, especially during like fine movement sports such as, ping pong or, sorry, table tennis, and other aspects like that, like golf, very fine motor movement, and relaxation training is very important for that. And then also, mental imagery. Maybe they're imagining themselves losing rather than winning. And so that's going to also hurt their confidence or mental toughness.
So I guess it's important to get mentally tougher, one, so you can get to the goal that you're trying to get throughout, various adversities. But when is trying to improve mental toughness, like when does it become like a negative thing? Or, one of you, actually, hold on. One of the questions was actually, so this question was from Shannon, and she asked, is there a negative side to mental toughness? And when can you tell if you cross a line into like an unhealthy obsession?
Yeah, that's a really awesome question. So that's a good question. It's a hard question to answer. A lot of the times we kind of think of mental toughness as just this end all be all that we have to have it. And that's what a lot of research says as well. But there are aspects of it that can be considered negative. So for my thesis in my master's program, I did a little bit on mindfulness and perfectionism. So something that comes up to my mind is perfectionism. And you kind of cross that line when you're trying to be perfect. And one negative feature of perfectionism is being having polarized thinking, which means all or nothing. So
Mm.
you either have to have all this or you're useless, something like
Mm-hmm.
that. So having those negative thought styles are really detrimental to performance. So that's a really good question on, can there ever be like too much mental toughness? I think if you take it too far, that it is. It all depends on your thought process for being mentally tough. Like another perfectionistic tendency is blaming yourself.
Mm.
So let's say you don't think you're mentally tough. Well, now you're thinking, why am I not mentally tough? Or what am I doing with myself? Like, why can't I perform as well as I want to?
Mm-hmm.
So that's another aspect of like perfectionism that is considered negative and that would hurt not only your performance, but also your confidence.
Well, I guess one way to gauge that, you're getting into like a negative realm of what you're trying to develop as self confidence is when it starts to have a negative effect on your performance and your actions, right?
Hmm.
So what I mean by that is like you touched on, like perfectionism and having sort of like this black and white thinking, where I either need to be perfect, I need to get everything 100% correct, or forget it. Like I'm not even bothering to try, fixing my diet or just training protocol or, play a game. It's either I win and I'm perfect or I don't bother at all, right? So
Yeah.
I guess trying to achieve that perfectionism, if it takes you to the point where, you're completely giving up because things aren't going your way, then you develop some sort of negative mindset.
Yeah. And that would most likely lead to burnout or
Mm.
injury or something along those lines where you really like, let's say you're a bodybuilder or something and you really think that mental toughness is you continuously going into the gym, even when maybe you're injured somewhere,
Yeah.
but you're still trying to go. And then, maybe you just feel like you need to go every single day, or like during a
Mm.
sport, you need to go every single day and get your reps in. And that all or nothing kind of leads to burnout and
Yeah.
you really not having motivation anymore for the sport.
Yes, that's a great point. And another example is with people's diets, and this is something I see with dieting athletes all the time, where they have this idea of this perfect diet, where any little slip on the diet, they ate a half a cookie, where in the grand scheme of things, it has little effect on their physique, on their fat loss goals or their muscle building goals. But when they have that mentality of, I need to be perfect, that half a cookie leads to, okay, I'm off the diet. I screwed up. I'm going to eat the whole box of cookies and I'm going to
Yeah.
order a pizza and sit here and just, soak in my negativity or my failure. And I'll start again on Monday, right? Where in
Yeah.
reality, you know, me as a coach, when I coach people, it's there's levels of adherences, right? You can your highest level of adherence is getting everything correct and checking all your boxes. But there are levels where one step down, maybe you slipped up a little bit, but that's fine. The goal is to get back on course, right? So point being, I guess it becomes negative when it starts to have a negative effect on your mindset and your performance. Question number 3 comes from Lou, and he asks, are there any common myths or misconceptions about mental toughness?
Yeah, definitely. And I'm glad you asked that because that's something that I try to advocate for. So mental toughness is kind of seen as a way where like you can't be weak or, you know, if these emotions that we don't want to have, such as like sadness or fear, and if you do have them, you're weak. And that's like a lot of coaches think that way as well. I don't know, it might be getting better since that mental health, that negative stigma is lowering a little bit. But a lot of coaches do, they tell their athletes, hey, listen, you need to be mentally tougher or you're weak or something like that. And I think that thought style is sort of a myth because research actually shows that being aware of your emotions is linked to superior performance. So really being aware of your emotions is good, and blocking them out, which we call that, let me find that, expressive suppression. So you're kind of like suppressing your emotions. That actually is very bad for performance and also just your mindset in general. So really understanding your emotions and being self-aware and how those emotions affect you is actually really good for performance. So, if you are sad or if you are scared or if you're angry or something like that, don't run away from those, but, embrace them. Be like, okay, I'm scared right now. This team is like really good, but that doesn't mean that I can't go out and demolish, So it's all about understanding them and working with them rather than just like putting them away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's a game changer for a lot of like old school coaches that have that, you're not allowed to have these thoughts, and any weakness, any thought of weakness that comes to your mind, you have to block it out. That stuff doesn't exist. So I guess what you're saying is you need to have a more of an accepting approach. Accept it and kind of work with it instead of trying to block it out, right?
Yeah, it's perfect. And to kind of lead into that, like coaching aspect, there's been a good amount of research on like how coaches should communicate with their athletes, or how they should like treat them. And researchers have supported that coaches should display what we call autonomy supportive behavior. So some examples of that would be like prioritizing athlete development, and then continuously challenging them. So obviously not like over challenging them and trying to like, burn them out or do too much, but, challenging them so that it is a challenging situation and they do build resiliency. And then establishing and maintaining positive relationships. And I'm going to emphasize positive relationships. Just because something is constructive and you're trying to work on improving them doesn't mean that it can't be positive either. So research shows that these autonomy supportive behaviors should be sought after, while people should avoid controlling behaviors. And other examples of that are prioritizing success. So really prioritizing the outcome. It doesn't matter how you did, how well you did during that game, you lost. So it doesn't matter how well you did. And that's a very controlling behavior. And then focusing on the athlete's weaknesses is another controlling behavior, rather than focusing on their strengths and how to improve them. And instead of weakness, we like to call it areas of improvement because, words are powerful. So areas of improvement to be found for the athlete is important, but focusing on their strengths is also good. And then also lastly, creating unchallenging training environments. So you still want it to be challenging. You don't want to just like be like, whatever, you're just do whatever you want.
Mm-hmm.
Autonomy and supportive is just the best way to be able to coach the athletes.
And do you want to define autonomy a little more, just for the people out there, for someone who may not know what that means?
Yeah, so autonomy just kind of meaning taking it into your own perspective. So like having that internal or intrinsic motivation is what we call it, instead of that extrinsic motivation. So extrinsic motivation being like outside factors like trophies. Maybe parents will bribe their kids with like lunch or money or something for doing well at practice. And then that's rather than intrinsic motivation, which is that motivation inside of yourself to get better. And that's kind of what autonomy goes with is doing it for yourself and not needing other people around you to provide something.
Yeah. So, and the internal or the intrinsic motivation is a more powerful tool than the extrinsic one, correct?
Yeah, definitely. There's a continuum of motivation for the self-determination theory, but it has been shown that extrinsic motivation is not controllable because as soon as those like external factors like trophies, if you're not getting them, I mean, you can't control getting a trophy, at the end. You can't really control getting that. It doesn't matter how well you do. Maybe your team just wasn't there that day. That doesn't mean you didn't do well, but those extrinsic motivation factors aren't controllable. Whereas intrinsic and staying motivated to yourself, knowing like why you do it, we call it finding your why. So why did you start? Why do you continue to do the sport or workout or diet, things like that? And finding that passion in yourself to continue that intrinsic motivation is very controllable.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. Yeah, even with some of the people that I coach myself, and some of the clients that I have, we always set like action-based goals, where it's like you're winning and making progress if you do these 4 workouts per week, if you are able to execute on your diet, right? Because those are the things that you have control over. And as you accomplish those things more and more, your confidence starts to build and you build momentum. Where if they only have a goal of, losing 10 pounds after 2 months, they may or may not achieve that for whatever reason, but they don't have much control over that, right? So one thing that you mentioned is that as a coach, you want to focus on athlete development, more so than just, some sort of extrinsic goal like winning a trophy or something like that. So I guess that ties into the whole intrinsic versus extrinsic goals. Is that correct?
Yeah, definitely. And it builds rapport or like relationship. And when athletes like know that you are interested in them and interested in building them as a person, not just an athlete, is really powerful. And I want to say that like that garners respect and a really positive relationship athlete and the coach. Whereas, sometimes they might feel that they can't trust you if, you're continuously looking for that success or winning or anything like that. And if they don't win, you're yelling at them, and that kind of also brings in a fear aspect. And that's also a perfectionistic tendency is negative evaluation of coaches. So that puts that perfectionistic style on them as well, because they're really fearing your evaluation and what you're going to do, rather than looking forward to growing with you together.
That's very cool. Because that actually reminds me of another thing is, do you think fear is a good motivator, or do you think that's a poor motivator?
Fear usually is not a good motivator, because like I said, it leads to that perfectionism, and they feel like you're constantly evaluating them, and that makes them either not want to be in like the limelight, which also makes them kind of like timid as well, and they lose their confidence based off that as well, because that kind of shows that they're their person is, contingent upon achievement,
Mm.
which is again a perfection. We're going off on perfectionism right now, but um, you're putting their self-worth based on success rather
Yeah.
than developing. So I wouldn't say that fear is a very good motivation for athletes or
Yeah.
exercisers.
I also feel like fear cuts off communications, right? Because if someone's always fearing their coach or fearing whoever it is that's training them, instead of being open with their issues or the problems or their thoughts and kind of working through that, they start to hide things because they're scared that they might get yelled at or they may feel like they're gonna get, exposed or just or talked down to, right, by their coach. So I think one of the worst things of fear is that it kills lines of communications between the athlete and the coach, which is paramount to make to progressing over time, right?
Yeah, that's a really insightful comment that you made because fear definitely, a lot of people feel fear as well. So kind of like you said, the coach is going to judge them negatively if they do something wrong or do something that the coach doesn't like. So yeah, that fear aspect definitely hurts that communication because they feel like they're constantly being judged rather than accepted. And having that accepting, unconditional, non-judgmental atmosphere is really helpful for thriving and growing rather than constantly feeling like you can't communicate.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. Okay, so another question that we have, actually, we actually covered the question that we got from the audience. Another question is how to develop self-confidence inside and out of the gym.
Okay. Yeah. So awesome question. There are a lot of ways that you can develop self-confidence or sport confidence in and out of the gym or your sport or whatever throughout your life. And kind of like I said, it's not really cookie cutter. So there's a lot of different aspects that confidence goes into. And a lot of different like mental performance coaches or consultants, such as myself, we all have different values or different systems that we use. Some people, use some different psychological skills training, while others use different ones. So what I personally do with confidence is a lot of self-talk because
Mm,
I've found that most people are going to say negative things about themselves.
mm,
Whenever they feel like they've done something wrong, or maybe they've made an error out on the field or on the court or something like that. And like you said earlier, they eat a cookie and then those negative comments start like snowballing up and then they eat a whole pizza or eat the whole box.
mm-hmm,
So I work on self-talk first usually and really have them understand their negative statements that they have. And you can't really change the negative statements until you know what you're actually saying.
mm,
So being specific with yourself. And another thing that I go into, I'm a very big proponent of mindfulness. And if you don't know what mindfulness is, it's kind of just staying in the present on purpose, non-judgmentally to experience each moment. That's by John Kabat-Zinn, who is a huge guy in mindfulness. And so it's kind of, I find important the non-judgmental part. So let's say you have a negative thought and then you're like, why am I thinking this? What am I doing? And then that's where that snowballing starts. So I try to teach being non-judgmental to yourself, which is extremely hard because we always judge ourselves. That's just how
mm-hmm,
society is. So it's hard to learn that and to have that be a part of your lifestyle. Because, if you're saying negative things to yourself in sport or in the gym, it's possible that it's, going across settings. So you could be saying it at school, or in a relationship or with family or anything like that. So I find that trying to not judge yourself is a very important aspect of confidence as well.
mm-hmm. Would you say self-talk is probably one of the more powerful aspects of, mental toughness and confidence in general?
Um, I would say it's important. I don't know. It's hard to say which ones are most important just because there are
Mm-hmm,
so many. And there's a lot of research on, so many different constructs. I have here, there's mental toughness has been associated with effective coping styles. So, coping with whatever happens. So if you eat that cookie, how are you going to cope with it? Are you going to start to negatively think like, oh, well, I just ruined everything, so let's just eat it? Or are you going to be like, oh, that tasted good. All right, that was good for me, and we'll stay on my diet. So having those effective coping strategies is important. And then self-talk also kind of goes in with that. I'm a big proponent of relaxation strategies because that's kind of with mindfulness as well, talking about deep breathing, diaphragmatic breathing. And then mental imagery is also important for confidence. So there's so much that has to deal with confidence. And that's also a broad aspect of, sports psychology that you can just kind of dive deeper into. And if you improve a bunch of these things, it's going to improve confidence over time as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, one thing that you just brought up that I'd like to get into a little more is mental imagery, because I feel like that's a powerful one in so many different aspects of life, right? That's something I used to do martial arts. I used to do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which involves a lot of technique when it comes to grappling and wrestling. And mental imagery was like a way to get more reps in, even when I was outside of the gym, right? I've also heard of a lot of powerlifters before competition, um, almost playing out the whole thing in their mind before they actually got on stage and performed the lift. And, they end up saying things like, it felt like I was there before, right? Just because they had such a strong, like a vivid imagination of how they would be when they got there, right? So can you just touch on a little more on like how you use mental imagery to help your athletes?
Yeah. It's really cool that you said that you get those reps in because we call them mental reps. So kind of like you're at the gym doing curls or squats or something like that. Those are your reps. We call them mental reps. So imagery is definitely something that is very important in sport and weightlifting and everything. And a lot of people do it either the night before or they can do it, right before their competition or their game or something like that or their lift. And that's really going to help their confidence if they're thinking positively. Some imagery is negative. So you kind of touched on the controllability aspect of it. So there's vividness and controllability with imagery. And how you control it is really important because if you're imagining you failing that lift or it just not going your way, then that might happen because that's what you're thinking about. But like you said, if you're imaging or imagining that lift and you complete it and you're like pumped up and you're feeling it, then that's going to be very helpful for you because you feel like you've already been there in that position, and that really helps confidence. And it's hard to learn imagery. It's very helpful. Some people get it right away and they're like, I can close my eyes and imagine. What we start out with is sometimes we do like a lemon script where we have them imagine a lemon and then like bite into it. Some people are like, wow, I just tasted that and it's in my mouth right now, like it's weird. And then others are like, I didn't even see the lemon.
Yeah.
So it depends on how good you are with it, and if you're not, we can improve that. It's a skill that we can improve. So that's cool that you touched upon that.
For example, if I came in as an athlete and I came into your office and said, "Hey, Nick, I just want to be mentally tougher. Like I want to be mentally tough. I want to be mentally strong. How can you help me do that as a consultant?"
Yeah. So kind of like as I talked about earlier, it's very broad. And so what I would do first is kind of just talk with you about, what brings you in today and what do you want to be tougher on? So as I said, there's a lot of different aspects about it. Is your confidence low maybe? Do you think that you need some maybe emotion regulation, that it's hard for you to cope on some things during, your sport or your weightlifting or something like that? Do you feel like you can't relax at night or get some sleep because you have a bunch of thoughts running through your head? Do you feel like you can't concentrate as much as you want to? And do you feel like you're not being very mindful when you're in the gym or when you're in your sport? So I'll kind of get a glimpse of what he or she thinks. And like I said, it's individualized. So I would work on making sort of a program, if you will, on how to be able to improve that. And then for me, this is how I do it, is it's kind of like, just a session where we're both together talking. I'm going to ask you some questions and try to get you to think really deeply. So it's kind of like that autonomy part where I want you to think about, how can you improve or what do you want to improve on? And that's kind of how it goes. A lot of people think that sports psychology or mental skills training is kind of like a Band-Aid where, a coach is like, all right, they need to be mentally tougher. Here you go, one session, boom. But it doesn't work like that. I can do 3 to 5 sessions solely on self-talk and, to improve confidence, but that's solely on self-talk. And then, there's pre-performance routines, effective coping strategies, relaxation training, mindfulness, based interventions, mental imagery. There's just so much in sports psychology or mental skills training. And, that's what I'm going to kind of go in with you. So it would depend on like how many sessions would you want? Would you want 5? Would you want 10? Or you can just go one by one to see how you're doing and see how you're feeling. So that's kind of how it would start out.
So I guess you would gauge where the person is, sort of like through a questionnaire and find out where their sticking points are. And all those things that you just mentioned, they're sort of like tools that you can use to try to improve their situation, right? Would you say that you notice that some may work better than others for certain people?
What do you mean by that?
So for example, maybe one guy does better when you improve his self-talk, or another guy does better when you improve his relaxation, right? Would you say certain tools work better for certain people? I'm guessing if somebody has a real problem with negative self-talk, then you probably focus more on self-talk with that person, right? If someone is very poor at dealing with adversity, maybe you'd have to improve on their coping. So I guess the question is, do you notice that certain things work better for certain athletes?
Yeah, definitely, 100%. So that's kind of why we do what we call an intake session. So that's that first session that I was talking about. That's why I'm asking you questions, because I want to get to know, what's the issue, or, what are your strengths already? And we can build on those strengths that you already have. And like you said, if self-talk is an issue and they're saying predominantly negative things, then I'm going to work on self-talk. And usually that's going to help them, because we do some, mental performance consultants do specific things like different interventions that are going to help them really recognize what they're saying to themselves. And I think recognizing is super important, because if you don't really recognize, it's difficult to be self-aware of how to improve in the first place. So definitely some things are going to work more for others. Mindfulness-based interventions might work for some people. As others, they're like, this is ridiculous. Why am I doing this? So it definitely is kind of like you got to gauge where they are, what they're open to, and what they want to work on.
That's amazing, man. So Nick, I think we should wrap this up here. We've touched on a lot of different topics and definitely a lot of great information. Can you tell the people where they can find you if they want to see more of your work, or if they want to reach out to you somehow?
Yeah, definitely. So I just made an Instagram for like research-based topics, and it's called nickmcmillen.mpc. So MPC stands for Mental Performance Consultant. And you can either, direct message me on there, or and then after that, I can give you my email or something like that. Or he can just, post it in the description below if he wants to do that as well. So,
Sure.
Whatever works on that, though, that's my Instagram, which is probably the most accessible part of me.
Okay, great. So I'm going to post the link to Nick's Instagram below. I'm also going to include, was it 7 aspects of mental toughness, or was it 6?
I think it was 6.
Yeah. We'll sort it out, and then we'll take those main aspects and we'll put them in the description below, just if people want to they want to look further into those different aspects. And yeah, for sure. Hopefully I can get you on another time, and then we can get more questions and get more of this information out there, because I think this is great information for the people to have.
Yeah, it's perfect. I appreciate your time and your interest in it. And I hope that this can help someone.
I highly appreciate it. So once again, thank you for being on, and we'll speak soon, okay?
All right, man. Sounds good.
All right, take care. Thanks for watching,
Yeah.
guys.